The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Practical Vedanta, The Ideal of a Universal Religion, Part 1. Wheresoever our senses reach, or whatsoever our minds can imagine, we find therein the action and reaction of two forces, the one counteracting the other and causing the constant play of mixed phenomena that we see around us and of those which we feel in our minds. In the external world, the action of these opposite forces is expressing itself as attraction and repulsion, or as centripetal or centrifugal forces, and in the internal world as love and hatred, good and evil. We repel some things, we attract others. We are attracted by one, we are repelled by another. Many a times in our lives we find that without any reason whatsoever, we are as it were attracted towards certain persons. At the same time, we are repelled by others. This is patent to all. And the higher the field of action, the more potent, the more remarkable are the influences of these opposite forces. Religion is the highest plane of human thought and life, and herein we find that the workings of these two forces have been most marked. The intensest love that humanity has ever known has come from religion, and the most diabolical hatred that humanity has known has also come from religion. The noblest words of peace that world has ever heard have come from men on the religious plane, and the bitterest denunciation that the world has ever known has also been uttered by religious men. The higher the object of any religion and the finer its organization, the more remarkable are its activities. No other human motive has deluged the world with blood so much as religion, and at the same time, nothing has brought into existence so many hospitals and asylums for the poor. No other human influence has taken such care not only of humanity but also of the lowest animals as religion has done. Nothing makes us so cruel as religion, and nothing makes us so tender as religion. This has been so in the past and will so in all probability be in the future. Yet out of this midst of din and turmoil, this strife and struggle, this hatred and jealousy of religions and sects, there have arisen from time to time potent voices drowning all this noise, making themselves heard from pole to pole as it were, proclaiming peace and harmony. Will it ever come? Is it possible that there should ever reign unbroken harmony in this plane of mighty religious struggle? The world is exercised in the latter part of this century by the question of harmony. In society, various plans are proposed and attempts are made to carry them into practice. But we know how difficult it is to do so. People find that it is almost impossible to mitigate the fury of the struggle of life, to tone down the tremendous nervous tension that is in man. Now, if it is so difficult to bring harmony and peace to the physical plane of life, the external gross outward side of it, then it is 1,000 times more difficult to bring it to peace and harmony to roll over the internal nature of man. I would ask you for the time being to come out of the network of words. We have all been hearing from childhood of such things as love, peace, charity, equality and universal brotherhood. But they have become to us mere words without meaning, words which we repeat like parrots, and it has become quite natural for us to do so. We cannot help it. Great souls who first felt these great ideas in their hearts manufactured these words, and at that time many understood their meaning. Later on, ignorant people have taken up those words to play with them and made a religious play upon these words, and not a thing to be carried into practice. It becomes my father's religion, our nation's religion, our country's religion, and so forth. It becomes only a phase of patriotism to profess any religion, and patriotism is always partial. To bring harmony into religion must always be difficult. Yet, we will consider this problem of the harmony of religions. We see that in every religion that there are three parts. In every great and recognized religion. First, there is the philosophy which represents the whole scope of the religion, setting forth its basic principles, the goal and the means of reaching it. The second part is mythology, which is philosophy made concrete. It consists of legends relating to the lives of men or of supernatural beings. It is the abstractions of the philosophy concretized in more or less imaginary lives of men and supernatural beings. The third part is the ritual. This is still more concrete and is made up of forms and ceremonies, various physical attitudes, flowers and incense, and many other things that appeal to the senses. In these consists the ritual. You will find that all recognized religions have these three elements. Some lay more stress on one and some on another. Let us now take into consideration the first part, philosophy. Is there one universal philosophy? Not yet. Each religion brings out its own doctrines and insists upon them as being the only true ones. And not only does it do that, but it thinks that he who does not believe in them must go to some horrible place. Some will even draw the sword to compel others to believe as they do. This is not through wickedness, but through a particular disease of the human brain called fanaticism. They are very sincere, these fanatics, the most sincere of human beings, and yet are quite as irresponsible as other lunatics in the world. This disease of fanaticism is one of the most dangerous diseases of all. All the wickedness of human nature is aroused from it. Anger is stirred up. The nerves are strung high and humans behave like tigers. Is there any mythological similarity, any mythological harmony, any universal mythology accepted by all religions? Certainly not. All religions have their own mythology. Only each one of them says, my stories are not merely myths. Let us try to understand the question by illustration. I simply mean to illustrate. I do not mean to criticize any religion. The Christians believe that God took the shape of a dove and came down to earth. To them, this is history and not mythology. The Hindu believes that God is manifested in the cow. Christians say that to believe so is mere mythology and not history, that it is superstition. The Jews think that if an image be made in the form of a box or a chest with an angel on either side, then it may be placed in the Holy of Holies. It is sacred to Jehovah. But if the image be made in the form of a beautiful man or a woman, they say, this is a horrible ideal. Break it down. This is our unity in mythology. If a man stands up and says, my prophet did such and such a wonderful thing, others will say that is only superstition. But at the same time, they say that their own prophet did some more wonderful things, which they hold to be historical. Nobody in the world, as far as I have seen, is able to make out the fine distinction between history and mythology as it exists in the brains of persons. All these stories, to whatever religion they may belong, are really mythological, mixed up occasionally, it may be, with a little bit of history. Next come the rituals. One sect has a particular form of ritual and thinks that that is holy, while the rituals of another sect are simply errant superstition. If one sect worships a particular sort of symbol, another sect says, "Oh, it is horrible." Take, for instance, a general form of the symbol phallus. The phallus symbol is certainly a sexual symbol, but gradually that aspect of it has been forgotten, and it stands now as the symbol of the Creator. Those nations which have this as their symbol never think of it as the phallus. It is just as a symbol, and there it ends. But a man from another race or creed sees it nothing but the phallus and begins to condemn it. Yet at the same time he may be doing something which to the so-called phallic worshippers appears most horrible. Let me take 2 points for illustration: the phallus symbol and the sacrament of the Christians. To the Christians, the phallus is horrible, and to the Hindus, the Christian sacrament is horrible. They say that the Christian sacrament, the killing of a man and eating of his flesh and the drinking of his blood to get the good qualities of that man, is cannibalism. This is what some of the savage tribes do. If a man is brave, they kill him and eat his heart because they think that it will give them the qualities of courage and bravery possessed by that man. Even such a devout Christian as Sir John Lubbock admits this and says that the origin of this Christian symbol is in that savage idea. The Christians, of course, do not admit this view of its origin, and whatever it may imply never comes to their mind. It stands for holy things, and that is all they want to know. So even in rituals, there is no universal symbol which can command general recognition and acceptance. Where then is any universality? How is it possible then to have a universal form of religion? That, however, already exists. And let us see what it is. We hear about universal brotherhood and how societies stand up especially to preach this. I remember an old story. In India, taking wine is considered very bad. There were 2 brothers who wished one night to drink wine secretly, and their uncle, who was a very orthodox man, was sleeping in a room quite close to theirs. So before they began to drink, they said to each other, "We must be very silent or uncle will wake up." When they were drinking, they continued repeating to each other, "Silence, uncle will wake up," each trying to shout the other down. And as the shouting increased, the uncle woke up, came into the room, and discovered the whole thing. Now we all shout like these drunken men. Universal brotherhood. We are all equal. Let us make a sect. As soon as you make a sect, you protest against equality, and equality is no more. Mohammedans talk of universal brotherhood. But what comes out of that in reality? Why anybody who is not a Mohammedan will not be admitted into this universal brotherhood. He will more likely have his throat cut. Christians talk of universal brotherhood, but anybody who is not a Christian must go to that place where he will be eternally barbecued. And so we go into this world in our search for universal brotherhood and equality. When you hear such talk in the world, I would ask you to be a little reticent, to take care of yourselves, for behind all this talk is often the intensest selfishness. In the winter, sometimes a thundercloud comes up, it roars and roars, but it does not rain. But in the rainy season, the clouds speak not, but deluge the world with water. So, those who are really workers and really feel at heart the universal brotherhood of man do not talk much, do not make their little sects for universal brotherhood, but their acts, their movements, their whole life show out clearly that they truly possess the feeling of brotherhood for mankind and that they have love and sympathy for all. They do not speak, they do and they live. This world is too full of blustering talk. We want a little more earnest work and less talk. So far, we see that it is hard to find any universal features in regard to religion, and yet we know that they do exist. We are all human beings, but are we all equal? Certainly not. Who says we are equal? Only the lunatic. Are we all equal in our brains, in our powers, in our bodies? One man is stronger than another. One man has more brain power than another. If we are all equal, why is there this inequality? Who made it? We. Because we have more or less powers, more or less brain, more or less physical strength. It makes a difference between us. Yet we know that the doctrine of equality applies to our heart. We are all human beings, but some are men and some are women. Here is a black man, there is a white man, but all are men. All belong to one humanity. Various are our faces, I see no two alike, and yet we are all human beings. Where is this one humanity? I find a man or a woman either dark or fair. And among all these faces, I know that there is an abstract humanity which is common to all. I may not find it when I try to grasp it, to sense it, and to actualize it, yet I know for certain that it is there. If I am not sure of anything, it is this humanity which is common to us all. It is through this generalized entity that I see you as a man or a woman. So, it is with this universal religion which runs through all the various religions of the world in the form of God, it must and does exist through eternity. I am the thread that runs through all these pearls, and each pearl is the religion or even a sect thereof. Such are the different pearls, and the Lord is a thread that runs through all of them. Only the majority of mankind are entirely unconscious of it. Unity in variety is the plan of the universe. We are all men, and yet we are all distinct from one another. As a part of humanity, I am one with you, and Mr. So-and-so, I am different from you. As a man, you are separate from a woman. As a human being, you are one with the woman. As a man, you are separate from the animal. As living beings, man, woman, and animal are all one, and as existence, you are one with the whole universe. That universal existence is God, the ultimate unity in the universe. In Him we are all one. At the same time, in manifestation, these differences must always remain in our work, in our energies, as they are being manifested outside. These differences must always remain. We find then that if by the idea of universal religion, it is meant that one sect of doctrines should be believed in by all mankind, it is wholly impossible. It can never be. There can never be a time when all faces will be the same. Again, if we expect that there will be one universal mythology, That is also impossible. It cannot be. Neither can there be one universal ritual. Such a state of things can never come into existence. If it ever did, the whole world will be destroyed, because variety is the first principle of life. What makes us formed beings? Differentiation. Perfect balance would be our destruction. Suppose the amount of heat in this room, the tendency of which is towards equal and perfect diffusion, gets that kind of diffusion, then for all practical purposes that heat will cease to be. What makes motion possible in this universe? Lost balance. The unity of sameness can come only when this universe is destroyed. Otherwise, such a thing is impossible. Not only so, it would be dangerous to have it. We must not wish that all of us should think alike. There would then be no thought to think. We should be all alike as the Egyptian mummies in a museum, looking at each other without a thought to think. It is this differentiation, this losing of the balance between us, which is the very soul of our progress, the soul of our thought. This must always be.